Yo guys, what's going on? It's Classic and welcome to a bit of myth busting, or a bit of scientific work. I'm not quite sure what this is, but basically the other day we did some racing in the TCX and I started to think, what are the differences between the TCX and the GT4 car? Because when I initially jumped in the TCX, I was like, this is very similar to the GT4 experience. And so what I wanted to do is do a bit of a back-to-back at Alton Park and take out the M2 TCX M2 and then the M4 GT4 and just see how they compare and contrast. So when I jumped into this for the start of the races we did the other day, my initial reaction was just how aggressive you need to be with catching the oversteer. You need to, with the GT3 cars, you have to really finesse it. I find when the car oversteers, you don't want to be, if you're too aggressive with your opposite lock inputs, the car's going to spin. Where this thing, you really got to crank on that lock and crank it on quickly and sort of fight quite a lot of resistance. So I went through the first corner and just instantly spun because I just, did a little finesse on the steering wheel to add some opposite lock, and it was just, the thing went and I could not get it back. So that was my first impression. But then eventually after doing a few of the races, these things are really freaking fun. And the word that came to mind was forgiving, especially compared to the GT3 experience. These things are very forgiving. Okay, you've got to crank the lock on, but other than that, you've got, a lot of ground clearance, a lot of suspension travel. These things are sort of very soft, and they're not darting around all over the track. And you can really jump over curbs, and they are not. It's probably kind of the best introductory car for Assetto Corsa, because it's just. You can play with it. You can play with it. It's not going to try and kill you, and you're not just going to spin out and go, what the hell was that? So let's see. We're going to put a lap in. It's not going to be super serious, but just to give us some kind of reference for the M4 lap. So just see, they do feel very similar speeds, I will say. And that's one thing. I actually did a. Well, that's okay. So it's not a lap guide. I actually did a GT4 league. I think it was 6 races we did, and I would highly recommend that to anybody who plays this game, because what I learned during those 6 races and practicing for them was just how many mistakes I was making in the GT3 car that was then getting hidden by the fact the GT3 have more power and more downforce. And when you go to the GT4 cars, there is nowhere to hide. If I'm slow out of this corner, my foot's flat on the throttle. It's been flat on the throttle since the apex, and I'm not struggling for grip. And so if you're late on that throttle, if you're not carrying the corner speed you need, there's no getting over it. Where in a GT3 car, if there's a corner where you can't be 100% flat on the throttle from the apex, then there's margin there. And so if you do get it slightly wrong, you can get on the throttle a little more aggressively further through the corner and kind of hide that mistake. And so since doing the GT4 league, I think I've got a lot faster in a GT3 car, knowing the mistakes I was making in the past. And so that's why I think I'd recommend, this car and the GT4 cars, because they're slightly slower. You have more time to think about what you're doing, but also because they're slower, there's nowhere to hide. You've got to make sure you're efficient with your inputs. And as we cross the line, we're going to do a 152.3. No idea if that's quick or not. So let's see how we do in the M4 GT4. And just on this outlap, I have noticed that this thing, I'm trying to spin its wheels a little bit more easily than the TCX car. I don't know how much power exactly these have compared to the TCX cars, but it definitely will. It's a little bit more serious in here than the TCX. But if we have a scale of GT3 on one side and TCX on the other, these definitely fall slightly close to the TCX, I think. You know, they both benefit from kind of reduced power, reduced aero, more ride height. I mean, through this chicane up here, I can be all over the curbs where, you know, you just wouldn't be able to in a GT3 car. I mean, I had to bounce over everything, look. It's like they don't exist. And so, you know, it still has a very similar kind of playfulness to the TCX. But because of the extra power, it does have an air of serious, like the GT3 cars do. You know, it's still got to be, you know, relatively precise, especially on throttles still. I'm kind of surprised. Last time I drove the GT4 cars, just compared to a GT3, they seemed a lot easier on the throttle inputs. Yeah, compared to the TCX is just very forgiving. Be interesting to see what lap time we do compared, because they do feel very similar experience. Oh, we got a little bit deep. Oh, make it work. Oh, careful. See, I think I could have just been flat on the throttle still there in the TCX and no worries. But yeah, we're going to do a 140. Wow, a 145. That's 7 seconds faster. We do a 52. Wow. Okay. Right, that is a bigger margin than I thought. Well, that was very surprising. I did not expect the GT4 car to be that much faster, because, especially in a straight line, it really doesn't feel that much faster. But obviously, I mean, see, I'm leaving rubber marks around that corner. Yeah, it's a good 7 seconds a lap faster than the TCX, which is surprising. Despite that, though, they do feel like very similar experiences. Again, you've got, you know, reduced aero and power compared to the GT3 cars. You've got, you know, more ride height, the more forgiving over the curb. So they do feel very similar in that respect. But the TCX is probably the most forgiving of all the cars on the game, and definitely a good starting point. I mean, obviously people who buy the base game, it's not going to come with the TCX. But if you enjoy the TCX, I definitely think there's a case to be made for the GT4 cars, because they're a very similar experience, but they add a slight element of that GT3 precision, especially with, you know, they feel slightly more precise on turning, and there's certain corners you have to be more mindful with your throttle inputs. But I think that was very worthwhile. If you've got both, try doing some back-to-backs, because it is an experience and a half. And I think for anybody who's not got either, definitely try the latest the Challenger DLC, because you get, I mean, a whole host. We've not even talked about the Cup cars and the Ferrari yet. But yeah, definitely worthwhile to pick that up. And if you enjoy the TCX, I think you will definitely enjoy the GT4 as well. But yeah, that was eye-opening. I did not think it was that much faster. It's yeah, really put things into perspective. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.